Hi, everybody. I'm a 1979 graduate of Piqua High School, and I was the senior class president. I don't recommend
Aren't you
it.
impressed?
Yeah, I don't recommend it. Puts a lot of stuff on your shoulders later.
His grade point average went way down.
Yeah. Too much social life. It's my pleasure to introduce my Wayne Street neighbor, and I call Big Sister, because we are.
Yep.
We're family. Terri Hemmert. I've known this family all my life. Terry's youngest sister, Joni, was a classmate of mine. We walked to kindergarten together. Her mom chased me around the kitchen table at the time. And
Trying to kiss him.
her mother was my first music teacher, first voice teacher, because I was in 1970 South Pacific at the high school with
70, yeah.
with Bill Hemmert. Bill Hemmert was my dad in South Pacific, and my sister and I played the little kids. So I have a lot of connection with this family. Wonderful folks. And as Dwayne mentioned, we have a concert coming up on August 2nd that will feature Lonnie and Christian Sterrett, and also my classmate, Fawn Kaiser. And what we'd like to do today is hand out those tickets for you, but we want to give you a chance to talk with Terri a little bit, pick her brain a little bit. She's been on the air at WXRT in Chicago for 45 years. She just left her daytime slot this past week.
Tuesday.
This week.
Yeah. 2 days
Time's
ago.
flying. And I thought that would be a really nice occasion for us to have Terri, while she's in town, visit with some students, but also answer any questions you have about getting out of high school, heading out into life, the music industry, any aspect. And we've only got maybe like an hour, so good luck.
Only an hour?
With that,
Thanks. I'm going to move my chair around so I can actually see them. Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Let's hear it for our MC, Chris. Well, can you hear me? I don't have a mic. Okay. Last time I was in this room was over 20 years ago. They asked me to come back and speak to the top 50 students. And it was the worst speech I ever gave in my life. Not because I suck at speaking, because I was a speech major and do it all the time, but because the 50 students were right in front of me, 25 on each side, and this long table. All the parents were on the other side, And anytime I say anything funny, the students would just look at me blank, and you could hear the laughter come from the sides. I'm thinking, well, this is really going over. And I knew it was going to be a drag because they had the mayor and everybody speaking, and the kids were already looking at their watches before I started speaking. So it was like the worst speaking engagement of my life because everybody kept looking at each other, rolling their eyes and looking at their watch. And I thought, well, that was a drag. And 20 years later, I get an email from some guy that said, you probably don't remember this, but you spoke at our top 50 banquet, and it changed my life. Thank you very much. And I thought, for one out of the 50, that was worth it. It was worth it. But as my aunt said, if I'd spoke to the bottom 50, they probably would have gotten it, what I had to say. They would have liked it and laughed at my jokes. So anyway, I'm glad to be back to redeem my speaking career here in this room, because it's not really friendly for speaking either, but glad to be here. But I'd rather do questions than talk forever. But what I want to say at the very beginning is when I was growing up in Piqua, I loved Piqua, and I come back a lot. I mean, everybody in Chicago knows Piqua because I talk about Piqua all the time, and sometimes humorously, but mostly with affection. And it was a great place to grow up. And I became a Beatle fan here. I saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan first time, and then watched the next 2 weeks. It was 3 weeks in a row, and that totally changed my life. And it really got me connected with life outside Piqua. And I was so curious about what was going on in the rest of the world. And the Beatles are like my connection to that. So, you can balance that. You can love Piqua and love where you're from and still yearn to get out there and see what's in the big world. And I also decided that I would be a disc jockey, because while I was still here in Piqua, I would go down to where the library is now, the old hotel. They had a bus stop down there where there's a bar now. And I'm sure none of you students have been in that bar, so later. But it was a it was a coffee shop then, more of counter, lunch counter. But they had this huge display of magazines. In fact, I found a picture on the internet of it from back in the 60s and did a blog that thousands of people who had never been to Ohio, let alone Piqua, just really responded to, because it was universal. But I said I would save my babysitting money every month and then come down once a month and spend over an hour looking at every music magazine there, because they had a really great collection of magazines. And I would figure out how much money I had. 35 cents an hour, not very much money. That was the going rate. But I would pick out magazines that had the best stories and the best pinups for my bedroom. And then I would sit at the lunch counter and buy a cherry Coke and read magazines and take them home and finish reading. But that was my contact with the life outside. And one of those magazines, when I was a junior in high school, had a picture of a disc jockey interviewing Ringo Starr. If you don't know who Ringo Starr is, that's a drummer for the Beatles, okay? Okay. And assume nothing, So I saw that picture and I thought, if I could become a disc jockey, I could meet the Beatles. Because most teenage girls were screaming at the Beatles and chasing them down the street and grabbing their hair. And I thought, I don't want to do that. I want to hang out with them. I want to be their pal. I want to, just chill, And I thought, this disc jockey obviously is just hanging out with Ringo with a microphone in his face. And I loved, it's ESPN now, but WING in Dayton was top 40. And they played all the Beatles and Elvis and Motown and all that other great stuff when it was brand new music. And I loved the disc jockeys there. They really had really great personalities. And one guy, Gene by Golly Berry, Clean Gene in his record machine, was a big rhythm and blues fan. You remember him. He was a big rhythm and blues fan, and that turned me on to soul music at an early age. And so I'm a huge soul fan, and I've gotten to know a lot of blues and soul artists that come through Chicago. It's really one of the joys of my life. But I thought, hey, I could be a disc jockey just like Clean Gene in his music machine and be around music and, meet the Beatles. That would be cool. That'd be a cool way to make a living, to play records, get paid for it, get free records, go to concerts. What I didn't stop and think was that there wasn't a single woman on the radio in Dayton or Chicago or New York or anywhere. It was just like if I had said, I want to play shortstop for the Reds, and they go, girls can't play baseball, because that was back. Now young women have an opportunity to do anything you want, basically, play any sports or be disc jockeys or whatever. Back then, it was considered weird that a girl would want to play baseball. So I started a baseball camp in my backyard and taught other girls how to play baseball. But I thought, well, I was just going to go full speed ahead and try to be a disc jockey, just because there wasn't a woman on before. And I ran into a lot of discrimination. But I persevered. I hung in there and finally made it. And got to do all my teenage dreams, and they were better than I even thought. I've got to meet Ringo. In fact, when I told him, I did a phoner with him, and I told him that story about Jim Stagg, the disc jockey who he remembered. And I said, yeah, I went to radio so I could meet you. I said, I hope it was worth the wait. And I said, yeah, it was, because a lot of stuff has happened. And I've met Paul McCartney multiple times. In fact, my brother Bill's daughter, Ellen, got to meet him and hang out with him for 45 minutes backstage. And that was a life-changing experience for her. We were with George Harrison's sister, the three of us going to the concert, and that was the first time Louise, his sister, saw Paul since George died. And she brought a photo album of childhood pictures that Paul had never seen. And Ellen and I were a fly on the wall watching him go through those and point him out. Oh, look at him there, 3 years old, And it was really an amazing 45 minutes. And then Ellen got her picture taken with the Beatle, and she was very excited about that. So it's one of those things where I had this crazy dream that everybody thought was very improbable, and it was. But luckily, my parents were very supportive, and luckily the education I got here and the opportunities to make music in a lot of different ways. We started a rock band. I was in band and orchestra, and Piqua Community Chorus, and so I had all these opportunities to overcome my stage fright, which we all get, and learn how to pull it off, and that really prepared me for this life on the radio. So what I would encourage you to do is, I teach a class at Columbia College in Chicago, History of Rock and Soul. And I always encourage my students, if you have a dream, follow it. Because think of how many friends you have that don't have a dream, that they don't get excited about something. What do you want to do? What do you want to major in? I don't know. And if you think you know exactly what you want to do, that your blood pressure goes up when you think about it. Like when I would go to WING every summer for high school and college applying for a summer job that didn't exist, and they were always very nice to me, but always said, well, sorry, see you next year. But walking into there, my heart was beating up in my throat. I thought, I want to work at WING more than anything in the world. And in fact, Grace Jackson had my old bedroom over on North Wayne, and when I turned that room over to her when she was 5, was she then? And I said, see right over that porch door, I cut out WING from a poster. A wing DJ came and did a dance at Piqua, and I grabbed that poster after the dance and cut it out. And every night I'd look at that when I go to sleep, and I said, someday I'm going to work there. And I told her that's the room where she would develop her dreams and then figure out how to make it work. And when you're going to sleep at night, thinking, okay, I really want to do this now. How am I going to do this? And you kind of figure it out. But I tell my students, if you have a dream, pursue it. The thing is, you might not get to that point that you think you want to do, but on that journey that you set out to do, to work to try to get there, you might find something that's even better. Main point being, if you don't get out of the house, you'll never know. If you don't push yourself or take chances or prepare yourself in education and every other way you can, if you don't do that, you'll never do anything. You'll just kind of get to a point in life like, why didn't I even try? Because I had no assurance. Nobody could say, you're going to make it. I know you're going to make it, because that would have been foolish because they didn't know. But if I hadn't hung in there, I wouldn't have made it. And that's my word of advice for you, especially if you're going into something wacky like radio. I mean, that's like joining the circus, How do I get into radio? Well, I don't know. If I said, how do I get to be a doctor? They say, well, you do this, this, and this, and then you do a residency, and then you do this, and then you're a doctor. But disc jockey, it's like the circus, especially female. So that, to me, is the big pearl of wisdom I can pass on to you, that if you have a talent or a desire to do something, it could be exotic, like being a female disc jockey at a time where there were no women on the air, or it could be that you want to be a really darn good school teacher or a band director or something like that, when you grow up, and to pursue that and to follow it. If you have something that wakes you up in the morning, that's the first thing you think of, do not ignore that impulse. Then do everything you need to do to develop your skills and be prepared for rejection and hang in there and see where it takes you. I have a story I tell my students right before I give them the final exam, which is, they're all very nervous then. And I do take them out for Thai food afterwards because I said I remember every adult that bought me a meal when I was in college, so I want them to remember me fondly. Plus they have handwriting cramp from writing for 2 hours, so I take them out and feed them. But right before I give them the exam, I tell them a story that I tell them to file away because they will encounter some rough bumps in the road, whatever they're going into. But my first job in radio, after 4 years of college and working at College Station and facing discrimination there, they wouldn't let me do national and international news. They wouldn't even let me audition for it because they said women don't sound authoritative enough. I said, my parents are paying just as much money to put me through the school as yours. I should be able to at least audition. Plus the guys that were doing the news, most of them didn't know how to pronounce any of the Russian names that came across the wires. They weren't that good. So I finally threatened to transfer, and they, okay, we'll let you do it. But so I learned how to face off on discrimination and stand my ground. But my first job in radio after all that experience was answering a request line at my favorite radio station for $90 a week, which is not a lot of money even then. And so I was in this walk-in closet where literally people would come and hang up their coats and say good morning to me, and I was taking down requests. But in 2 years' time, I worked my way out of that closet and ended up being the assistant to the program director, making up things for me to do so that I could, learn more stuff. I started producing a talk show. I fill in for every office person, like people scheduling commercials and all kinds of stuff, just so I could learn the business. And then finally they said, we need somebody to work Thanksgiving. Would you be willing to work? We know you did some air shifts. And I said, yeah. And then I was doing all nights once in a while, filling in for people. And I thought, this is how you do it. You pay your dues. You get your foot in the door or in the walk-in closet, and you get, move up. And someday, well, they weren't going to put me on the air full time because they were the only station that had a woman on middays. And they said, we can't have 2 women on. Be reasonable. Okay. I mean, I'm not making this up. This is the way it was. And so I thought, well, maybe someday Gwen will leave and I can take her shift, who knows? It was my favorite station. It was a great progressive station. And one day I was working really hard in the office. I was doing the work of 4 people. I'd finally made enough jobs for myself that I kept really busy. And my boss, who was this real jerk, he thought he was Elvis. He wasn't. He really did. He did the little curly lip and stuff and the little accent. And he came and he was just standing there watching me. He was like being a bully. You could just tell it wasn't a nice watch. And he said, you think you're going to make it, don't you? And I said, well, I know there are no guarantees, but you know what my goals are, and I'm hoping I get there. And I hope it's here because I love the station. I'm very loyal to it. And he said, you're not going to make it. You don't have what it takes. And I went home sick to my stomach. I thought, maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree. I'm 24 years old. I've never been on the air full time. This guy's general manager of a station in Chicago, the 3rd largest market in the country. He knows something. And I thought maybe it's time for me to become a speech teacher. That was my fallback plan. And for some reason, I just decided, no, I'm going to hang in there. I'm not done yet. So I hung in there and eventually left there and went to Rochester, New York. And an old college friend of mine, we made a blood pact and said, whoever gets to be a boss first will hire the other one. And he was older than me, so he got that job. And he hired me to do all nights in Rochester for a couple of years. When I got mono, because I was on midnight to 6 nights a week, and trying to do all these other things. So I came back to Chicago after that and stayed there forever. But anyway, I went home and I thought, seriously, maybe I should give it up. But I told my students that he ended up leaving that job and becoming general manager of a station in Florence, Alabama. And I'm in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So what do and thank you. Thank you. And that's what the students do. They clap. So I said, remember that story. So when somebody's handing you a load of BS, think, my teacher warned me that there'd be somebody like this trying to cut me down and discourage me, and just hang in there. Because those are usually the losers. If they're good people, they wouldn't be cutting you down. He'd be saying, what can I do to help you? How can I encourage you? What do you need? Which is what I do for my students and my coworkers. Which is why at 71 years old, my best friends are working in their 20s, because I'm always nurturing them and helping them out. And so that, and my students the same way. I love my students. They're my kids. I adopt them all. And in fact, when I went through these surgeries a few years ago, and I was laid up and couldn't even be alone for a few nights, it was my former students sleeping on the couch there to help me get up and go to the bathroom in the middle of the night on the walker. They're great kids. So I'm lucky I got to do both things I wanted to do. I got to be a speech teacher because I make them do an oral report. And I got to be a disc jockey. And I got to meet 2 of the Beatles. And I get to host a Beatles show every Sunday morning that Chris sets his alarm. Where's Chris?
Over here, biggest fan.
6 o'clock in the morning because he lives in San Diego. It's 2 hours earlier. And he texts me every Sunday morning. I always look forward to it. And so I do the Beatles show, and I also host a Fest for Beatles fans, which is a big Beatle fan convention, which is coming up in August. And it's 3 days at this hotel, and I'm totally exhausted at the end of 3 days because I'm constantly working. And it's great because I've gotten to meet all the people around the Beatles, anybody that ever worked for the Beatles and whatever. So it's led me to a good place. And coming from Piqua, I thought this was the impossible dream. But I hope you take that story, not so that you can write my biography, like, well, now I know all about Terri Hemmert, blah, blah, but so that you can apply that to your own dreams. And And look for encouragement, look for mentors, look for people that believe in you, whether it be a teacher or a family member or a family friend. I had a lot of mentors here in Piqua. I was so lucky. I had Sam Heitzman, who was president of the bank, who took an interest in me and was like a grandfather to me. He was so helpful. Wrote my letter of recommendation at Elmhurst College, was a great guy. Congressman Bill McCullough, I worked for his campaigns every other year since I was in grade school, stuffing envelopes, and he was so good to me. And there were so many people in Piqua that mentored me and encouraged me to try it. Go give it a shot. If you fail, you fail. Then you'll do something else, but give it a shot. So I hope you hook up with some mentors and teachers and family friends and people like that, people that'll be in your corner and encourage you, and then just have the guts to take that step that you don't know where it's going to lead you. You could fall flat on your face, but people that fail usually get up and do something else, something really well, and they learn from that failure. So I have a mantra that I pass on to my students, and I have to clean it up for you guys because you're not in college yet. But don't let the BS get you down, because you will encounter BS. You will encounter people like my former boss who will just try to tear you down. But in the meantime, I've gotten to meet all my favorite rock stars. I've gotten to hang out with blues artists. They're legendary. I'm really good friends with Mavis Staples, who's a soul singer who I've been a fan of since I was in college. And she calls me her pastor, Reverend Sister Terri. She even told her pastor at church, said, "Sorry, you're not my pastor. Terri is," and he knows me because I spoke at her sister's funeral. And so to know my heroes and be friends with some of them is just beyond my wildest expectations. And I don't think of them then as celebrities. They're human beings. They're friends. And I don't like them because they're famous. I like them because of the real person they are. And they have great stories too. So if this was a campfire camp, we could spend the whole week hearing stories about rock and roll stars. But I would rather hear from you guys and find out what you want to know, or what you're doing, or how do I get from point A to point B. And there's no treasure map. I can't spell it out. Even with some of my students who are minority students, Hispanic or African American, I said I can't, or with women, there's still a lot of discrimination against women. Don't be fooled, it's still a problem. And I said I can't give you 10 ways to identify if it's sexism or racism or whatever. It's not like I could write it on the blackboard and spell it out. You have to know it in your gut. And you have to know when to call BS, and you have to know when to think, okay, maybe it's not, maybe it's me. Maybe I need to hear that constructive criticism. But I can't tell you an easy way to figure that out. That comes with experience and what we call in Chicago street smarts. You know not to walk down that alley at night, because you're smart, so you're still alive, and you know not to do certain things in your career, so you still survive. But and I'm not retired now. I'm semi-retired, I'm calling it. But I'm still busy. I still will do the Beatles show. I do a public affairs show where I get to interview people and get information out about what's going on in Chicago, how you could tutor, volunteer to tutor. There's a free concert in the park. There's a Puerto Rican festival in this neighborhood. But also, you might know about Chicago, there's a lot of shootings, a lot of gang violence in certain neighborhoods. And I've reached out to people in those neighborhoods who are trying to make their neighborhood better and give them a platform where they can talk about that on the air, and people can actually hear, not from some politician or something, but somebody that lives there, what's really going on and what we can do. And that's been an ongoing series. And my big passion is, and I got this from my mother, is at music education. I think music education is not a luxury, it's essential. Where's the band director? Okay, so, but there you go. So it's essential. You're learning stuff in band that is going to help your life so much. You are learning how to work as a group. You are learning how to perform even when you have the flu and you want to throw up instead of performing. You learn you learn discipline. You learn how if you have a really bad concert or you came in on a rest at contest, you learn how to pick yourself up and keep going. You learn all these life skills are going to be important. And my feeling is, especially inner city kids who don't have a lot of advantage, when you take band and choir and creative writing classes out of the school, you're handicapping them even more. So I was really on fire about this, and I got this poetry club from a high school to come in and speak on my show and how poetry saved their lives. And when I was in high school, I wrote poetry about just whimsical things and blah, blah, blah. They were writing about HIV and AIDS. They were writing about suicide. They were writing about depression, about sexual abuse. They were writing about things that I never thought about in Piqua when I was in high school. And they weren't just ranting, they made poetry, and that takes a lot of work. And they had this club, and they had each other, they had a community. You get a community. That's why my mom's chorus was called Piqua Community Chorus, and I saw how she built community in this town and brought people, everybody from farmers to bankers to black and white to high school kids to senior citizens to people from the Dayton Opera Chorus to people who could barely read music, and we got together and made music and made community. That's really important. And so I'm trying to get my generation to make these things available. My thing is a kid in the inner city they need community. They need to be part of something. They can choose a gang or they could choose a choir. If there's not a choir, what do they go? Where do they go? They go to the gang. And they end up dying before they graduate high school. So we've got to provide the choir. That's my passion now, is to get people involved, contributing or volunteering or doing something to help these programs come back. Because it's not even a matter of survival, it's bringing them back. And the other day I just won an award for this group that I've been involved with for over 20 years that brings music classes to inner city schools that don't have them, but we get financial support for that. And they had 4 young men get up and perform at this big banquet, hundreds of people there. And they were like junior high, 4 African-American kids. They wrote this rap song. They produced the beats. They learned how to do Pro Tools and all that stuff, and their teacher was there to play the soundtrack. And they got up there on stage in front of all these people, all white people. They've never seen so many white people in their lives. And the one kid said, "We are so nervous because we've never done this before." And they killed it. They did a great job, and we all call and response. And so when I got up and gave my speech, I said that music education makes you fearless. You learn how to fail, you learn how to succeed, you learn what kind of work and discipline it takes to make something like that work, and that makes you fearless. And I said it made me fearless when I get into radio when they said no women need apply. And I said, and these kids tonight, I said, when that kid said he was nervous, I thought, good for you, now turn that into adrenaline and get it, And I said, next time they go on stage, they're not gonna be as nervous. And the third time they get on stage, they can't wait to get on the stage, And that's so important. And that's what you're learning in band. You're learning how to get up and do stuff that, you might have been a little intimidated by. You're learning how to start out as playing a lot of really bad notes. Like I played French horn, and my mom said it sounded like a bull moose in heat, when I first started out. And then I ended up in a Mozart horn quartet, But this is all important stuff you're doing right now, and this will make you fearless. And believe me, when you get out of that cold, hard world, you need to have something there, a backbone and spine because you're going to get ups and downs. But you got to take the downs and then get up and do. And then I want you all to write to me when I'm in a nursing home and tell me, remember that time you came to Piqua High School? Well, you know what? I got busy, and and this is where it got me. Because nothing makes me happier than when I hear from like that kid, the 1 out of 50 that said, that changed my life. That was worth driving to Piqua for. And you guys are worth driving to Piqua for. So let's go, Piqua proud, Captain Underpants, woo! I have more listeners that write, said, my kids are reading Captain Underpants and they're talking about Piqua, what the heck, what's going on here? I said, Piqua's the center of the universe. Well, and somebody asked me earlier about the Mills brothers. The Mills brothers are from Piqua. You all know the Mills brothers. Well, I told Don Mills, because I came back to Piqua when they had that big thing to celebrate the Mills brothers, and Don was the only surviving member at that point. And I got to meet him, and I said, in my class at Columbia College, I traced all modern music back to Piqua. I said, it all started with the Mills brothers, and he laughed. He goes, you're exaggerating. I said, no, I'm not. And I told him, I said, the Mills brothers influenced doo-wop. Doo-wop influenced the Motown male groups like the Temptations and the Four Tops, and that just kept growing. And then the Mills brothers also influenced the Everly brothers, who were big stars in the 50s. Don and Phil, they were brothers. And I saw a documentary once where they asked Don and Phil what the first recording was that they ever made. And they lived in Chicago at the time, and their dad, Ike, played guitar, and they got this little booth, like a phone booth. Well, you've probably never seen a phone booth before. So anyway, they got this booth. I keep remembering, I can't tell my kids it sounds like a nail down a blackboard. They don't know that sound, you know. But anyway, they went into this booth and recorded you just record one record, record a record for their mom, and they sang Paper Doll, a Mills Brothers song, because as they said in the documentary, the Mills Brothers had the best harmonies ever. So I told Don Mills, I tell my students, the Mills Brothers influenced the Everly Brothers. The Everly Brothers, their harmonies influenced the way John Lennon and Paul McCartney sang together in the Beatles. The Beatles influenced everybody that came after them. I rest my case. It all comes back to Piqua. And Don laughed his butt off. He just thought that was so funny. But he said, yeah, you're right. I never thought of it that way. But yeah, I see that now. So let's have some questions. Because I could ramble all day. I do that for a living. Yes?
Hi, Terry. Tom Hudson.
Tom, how you doing?
I want to thank you. About 10 years ago when I was teaching here, I called you. You graciously accepted to be on my little flip phone, speaker phone.
Oh my gosh, I remember that.
And she talked to my whole students for about 25 minutes, and they had some pre-arranged questions. And I think the reason I did that, we had the old Piqua-isms quarterly newspaper, and they had a nice write-up about you. And
Oh yeah.
so I thought I'll get my kids connected with you, but I want to thank you for that.
Well, thank
And
you.
The second thing is Dave McMillan over here, his dad George. I want to know what was the story about you promoting George's on Chicago and the trips, because I was like laughing, falling out of my chair when I first heard about it, but I don't know the story.
Well, the story is that I love your dad so much, and I love that place. In fact, I got interviewed for the Troy paper yesterday. I said one of the deepest regrets of my life is coming home and not going to George's. You know, I really miss it. I always said if I ever got married and had the reception at Piqua, George's would cater it. You know, I mean, really. And one other thing, and that's where you got the T-shirt, is that my father, when he wasn't doing well, he was at the tail end of his life, and I couldn't get home for Father's Day. I had to work, and it broke my heart because I really wanted to be there. So I called George's, and I said, I know you don't deliver, but if you could please take a hot fudge sundae the way Fritz liked it. He had a particular way. He liked the nuts, no whipped cream, no cherry. Yeah, okay. You remember. So I said, if you could just have somebody run that over to the house and deliver it to him on Father's Day, I will pay you any amount of money. Just tell me how much, I'll write you a check right now. And George says, settle up when you come home next time. And I said, are you sure? Yeah. So sure enough, Sunday they go over there on Father's Day, and my mom answers the door. And I don't know if you delivered it or who you delivered. And Betty took it and gave it to Fritz, and he loved it. It meant so much to him because he loved George. He'd take Gracie, his dog, over there, and George would make him a nickel cone, and the dog would eat the ice cream out of the cone and then eat the cone. It was great. So anyway, I came back and set up. I said, how much do you owe you? They're like $1.75. I go, no, seriously, I want a tip. I want to do a delivery fee. No. And I knew he was going to do that, so I brought a couple T-shirts. And I can't believe you still have one. And that's a true story. Back me up. But there was a April Fool's joke on XRT. It was, I think, '84. It was when Bruce Springsteen came out with the song "My Hometown." And so for an April Fool's joke, I said, I'm so proud of my hometown. I put it together. We got a contest. Win a trip to Piqua. A trip for two. Trip for two. Second prize is win 2 trips to Piqua. But we did a promo. We recorded it, and I interviewed my mom and dad, And Mom said, well, the high school's doing a Annie Gets Your Gun, a production of that. Will give you 2 tickets to go see that. My dad, Fritz the plumber, said we'll take you to the sewage plant and give you a tour, and they'll give you a demonstration of how they separate the liquids from the solids, and then I'll take you out for a beer. Which reminds me, once I tried to turn my dad on to Weiss beer when he's out in Chicago. It was like a lemon stuff. It was a German kind. I said, what'd you think? He said, tastes like a urine specimen. I said, how do you know what a urine specimen tastes like? He goes, I'm a plumber. I went, okay, that's... But back to the contest. True story. Back to the contest. I called Bill's daughters, who were in grade school then. Oh, what are you guys going to do for the winters? Well, we'll take them to Fountain Park. I said, and then what? I don't know. There's nothing to do here. It's kind of boring, you know. And then you get a year's subscription to Piqua Daily Call, so you keep up with the news. But the grand prize was you could go to George's Dairy Barn and get anything you want. We cover it. You know, sky's the limit. Banana split, go for it. You know, whatever. And so we sent a tape of the promo we did, and people were really upset that it wasn't a real prize. They were really mad at what, you know. And so I said it to Piqua Daily Call. They said, next time you come to town, we want to do a story. So that, and they said, well, we want to take a picture. And I didn't know it was going to be on the front page. It was this little Newsweek, you know. Where do you want to be photographed? And I said, George's. So we went across the street, and there's your dad sticking his head through that little screen window. And it was on the front page of the paper. But there are times where one night, you know, that little cement thing around so you wouldn't knock the light pole over, that's where we'd sit, because I don't think you had the picnic table there. So I was sitting there with my nieces, and they were in grade school, and we were sitting there eating our ice cream, and I was home for a high school reunion, and this car sitting in the, you know, people go in their car and eat their ice cream. And they finally got out, are you Terri Hemmert? And I thought, oh, I don't remember them. You know, they're from my high school reunion. I don't have the name tag, you know. And here they were from Chicago. And they were driving down I-75, and they go, there's Piqua, let's go. You know, so they went to Piqua. They found the plumbing shop. They found the high school, which is now senior living. And they found all these other places. And then they said, we got to find George's. And they drove around, they finally found it. And so they were sitting there in their car eating ice cream so they could go back and tell everybody in Chicago they had ice cream at George's.
The whole thing was an April Fool's joke. It wasn't real?
No, it was an April Fool's joke.
I thought the thing was real.
No, it was an April Fool's joke. But these people that knew about George's were sitting there eating because they wanted to say they had ice cream at George's. And they look out the window and they see me sitting there with my niece, and they go, I think that's Terri Hemmert. Those must be her nieces, you know. Which really drove them nuts that they get recognized in Chicago all the time. They go, you must be the famous nieces. And I go, yeah, whatever. So they got out, we posed for pictures, and your dad came out and posed with him. There's famous George, and I'm still bummed you closed. Everybody's entitled to retire, I guess. But yeah, I have a lot of great memories at George's. But a lot of people in Chicago have gotten off the expressway and taken pictures of certain things I've talked about and sent it to me. Or like I wrote an article for the Sun-Times. It was the 25th anniversary of the release of A Hard Day's Night. And I said that my friend Ginger Hunt and I went to all 4 showings the first day it came to Shine's Piqua Theater, which is now a Hallmark store or something. and between the 3rd and 4th, we were so hungry, and we were just done with the candy, that the woman at the ticket box let us run across the street, get a hot dog, and go back in for free. And so when I wrote this article, somebody took a picture they'd taken of Shine's Piqua Theater when they drove around Piqua and said, is this where you saw Hard Day's Night? And I go, oh, guys, stalking, you know. Stalkers are out there. But Piqua on the map. But I'm proud of Piqua. I think this is a great place. A lot of good stuff here. Oh, there's a story I tell about the Piqua band. And I told this story at I do a symphony, Chicago Symphony Orchestra. I've been there 18 years. I do once a month, I do a pre-concert lecture. And it's pretty unorthodox. And it's a lot of fun. And we sell it out there. Like 300 people come to this beautiful ballroom and talk to them about what they're going to hear in the concert that night. And it's been really popular. We didn't think it'd last this long, but it's been great. And I get guest speakers, members of the orchestra to come up, and it's a lot of fun, a lot of laughs too, because I figure if I make them laugh, they're going to be more open to hearing the music, because it's for people that aren't really into classical music, they're curious about it. So I make connections with the Beatles and Radiohead and all kinds of stuff. Hip hop, I've done about how classical composers sampled, but they didn't have the electronic sampling, but there are other ways of sampling. So, just I make this stuff up, there's no book for it. So, but it's really fun. But one time, and they know I played French horn in the Piqua band and orchestra, that's a big deal. And we were doing Dvorak, and in our band, we did the fourth movement of New World Symphony. That's a good war horse for a high school band. And I played I'm not going to mention this woman's name. I did then because nobody knows her. You might know a relative of hers. But Judy in the horn section, we went to contest. We made it through regionals and we got to state. And our big piece de resistance was New World Symphony. So I said, I am going to sing for you tonight. And actually the conductor of the Chicago Symphony Chorus was in the audience. He's a friend of mine. And I said, I'm kind of intimidated to sing in front of Dwayne Wolfe because that's kind of scary, but I will sing Judy's French horn solo that she played at a contest. And what it was, and I had the video and the horn part it's really big, dramatic, great horn part. And at the end, it's like dun 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 dun. And so I sang her solo. It was dun 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 dun. I got the mic. Dun. She played on the rest, and we were playing triple fortissimo. And she just blared it out like a bull moose in heat, and we're all going, oh, we're so screwed. There goes our number, right down in the toilet. And so anyway, and they were all laughing hysterically. So I had to keep going on. I don't plan these speeches. I just do an outline and go with it. And I thought, well, they like that. I'll continue it. So I said, we were back in the room, after we got off the stage, and Judy was crying hysterically, and we were all furious with her, but we felt very sorry for her because she was crying and she was obviously just devastated. And we're going, Judy, don't worry about it, anybody. And we're all thinking, there but for fortune, thank you, Jesus, for not letting me do that, it could have been me, And we were all like, ooh, and the emotions were running high, and she was crying. We said, don't cry, it's okay. It's just contest, We just worked all year for it. Don't worry about it. And she's crying and she's sobbing and she said, you guys will never forget this. And I said, no, it's fine, Judy, it's fine. I said, that was 1966. And I remember it like it was yesterday. But people were just laughing. And so I couldn't quit talking. So I had to go the next step. And the next step was I heard from Judy years ago. It was back before internet, so she found the address of the radio station and wrote to me. And she and her husband lived out in some godforsaken state like Montana or something. And they started a nudist colony. And she invited me to come out and visit them. And this is the first I've heard from her since she blew our contest. And I thought, there's certain people in high school that you always wonder what they look like naked. And then there's some people you don't want to know, Judy was in the don't want to know category. And I thought, and that was 20 years ago. There's no way I'm going to Montana to see. And people were they were like running to the bathroom. I made them have to go to the bathroom. They were and then I stopped. I could have gone deeper, but I just stopped right there. I thought, okay, stop while you're ahead, Terri. But I won't mention her last name, but I'll never forget that. She blew that nut. But she went on to be successful and that goes back to what I said earlier about learn how to get up on your feet. She got on her feet and opened a nudist colony. So there is life after screwing up. That's one of the things you learn in music education. It's important to learn how to fail and get up on your feet again. But anytime I talk about Piqua in settings like that, they love it. They just think that's so folksy. And I go, no, I'm not making this up. This really happened. Who needs to be a writer when you live in a town where all these things you can talk about years later, including George's Dairy Queen. So, any more questions? Questions? Yes?
What has been one of your most fun conversations during an interview with someone?
I had a lot of fun ones, but maybe I should tell you a serious one. I just told this earlier today. How many of you know the Foo Fighters? Dave Grohl, great guy. Dave Grohl played at the White House. They gave Paul McCartney a Gershwin Award, the George Gershwin Award, and I was lucky enough to be invited to that. And then I found out I could bring somebody, so I called my sister in Cincinnati. I said, could you be in D.C. by Wednesday? Yes. So Julie and I got to go to the White House. And Paul McCartney kissed her on the cheek afterwards, and she never let me forget it. Yeah, he hugged you, but he kissed me on the cheek, so. But in fact, she got married a couple years ago, and she said, her wedding morning, she said to her future husband, this is the second best day of my life. He goes, I know, Paul McCartney, because he's accepted it. So, but there were all these other musicians. Stevie Wonder was there. Long, the classical pianist, was there. Jack White was there. Really great lineup. Paul picked each one of them to do a song of his. Emmylou Harris. It was really an amazing concert. And Dave Grohl was there, did Band on the Run, because Foo Fighters do that as an encore sometimes. And Dave and Paul are really close. They've got this bromance thing going, And so we were at the reception, and there's Dave and his wife over there, and nobody's talking to him. And I asked his manager, I was talking to his manager, and I'd never met Dave, and I said, I got a story to tell him. Is it okay time? She said, yeah. So I went over, and I didn't want to, he knew about XRT. I'd never met him before, so he didn't know me, and I didn't want to say XRT. I didn't want this to be a business thing. I said, I teach college. I'm a teacher, and I am. And I teach at Columbia College, and I said, I've always wanted to meet you to tell you about a student of mine. And he went, okay. So he was in his polite mode. Okay, tell me about your student. And I told her about this guy who's probably 30 years old. I knew him because he worked at Tower Records, and I spent half my paycheck at Tower Records every other Saturday. It was a great place. It was like a community center. It was more than just a record store. And I said, this guy worked there, and he told me he wanted to get his degree, so he's going to go to Columbia and finish up. So I said, great, take my class. He said, I already signed up for it. So he took the first semester, which is 1920, and we do cover the Mills Brothers, 1920 to 1969. And he got the highest points you could get on every single thing he turned in. Terrific student. And I'm telling Dave Grohl this, and he's being polite and listening. Okay, this is interesting. Okay, why? Okay. And I said, at the end of the semester, I said, did you even learn anything? Because you know this stuff. And he said, but I learned your perspective, and it was very different, and I really loved it, and I'm coming back for the second semester. I said, great. So he came back the second semester, and I could tell something was up because he was increasingly not looking good. And he finally came up to me and said, I've been diagnosed with this very rare and aggressive cancer, and I might be missing some classes because I'm going to have radiation and chemo. And I said, okay, thanks for letting me know if I can help you in any way. So he started missing some classes. He had a trach, and he was still going to school, and every week I saw him, he just looked much worse. And it was breaking my heart, and then finally it got to a point where I couldn't excuse him anymore because of the school rules. So I said, why don't you drop and come back next spring? And he said, well, no, I want to finish up this year. I'm going to graduate. And then I realized that what he was doing is he knew he wasn't going to be around next spring. And so I went to somebody at the school administration. I said, what can I do for this kid? I want him to pass so he can graduate, and he's dying. And he's a great student. The guy, proved it the first semester. And she said, well, since he's, comes highly recommended from you, you can give him an extra assignment and then pass him. So I thought about it because I didn't want to do something that was going to put more pressure on him to get the work done. So I said, I went 4 pages, no bibliography, just write how music's helping you through this ordeal. And he went, great. And he turned in a brilliant paper, just heartbreakingly incredible. And he gave me a CD because it's like him to go the extra mile. First song was Foo Fighters, the acoustic version of Times Like These. And the last song was the electric version of Times Like These, which is a very inspirational song. And you could see how that would help somebody through a rough time, times like these, And as I'm telling Dave this story, all of a sudden his face changes, and he realizes why I wanted to tell him the story. And then I said that Sean died. He graduated. He died shortly after that, and I went to his wake. And I met his parents, and they said that paper really helped him focus even more on music. That was great. Thank you. And he loved that class and stuff. And then I met his fiance and his brother. And by now, Dave has tears going down his cheek. And I said his brother took me over to see some pictures of Sean when he's a little kid. And all of a sudden I spotted this picture. I said, oh my God, there's Sean with Dave Grohl. You know, they met backstage at a concert. And his brother said, yeah, Dave Grohl was Sean's one and only man crush. And Dave Grohl, crying and burst out laughing at the same time. And he said, you don't know how much this means to me, because this is one of the great nights of my life. I'm here to honor a man whose music got me through all my rough times. To know that my music is getting somebody else through rough times, it's gone full circle. And at the White House, you know. So that to me was one of the most meaningful encounters I've ever had with a musician. And he went on to just tell me stories about how that song, he said, I wrote that song, but it's like somebody else wrote it because it's helped me through stuff too. And as an artist, that's kind of a weird turnaround, but it was great. So then I did a blog on it, and Sean's brother and family got to read it, and it was very healing. But I found that music is so important that people are inspired by it. Like with Beatle music, people die to it. I've heard from listeners who somebody was in hospice and they had Beatle music playing continuously. And I told Paul once, I said, it was after the interview, and I said, you know, if there's one thing I want to tell you is that you might not know this because you're in the middle of all this, but I get to see it because I'm not Paul McCartney, I'm just the DJ. But I get called on to visit the sick and visit the dying or the grieving, and I see that your music is always there and it's always giving support. And he said, I know exactly what you're talking about. He said, I don't publicize it, but I go out of my way to be available for things like that. It made me love him even more. But one more side story on that. At the same time, I thought I got to lighten this up. This is a little too serious. I don't want to say goodbye after all the death and dying talks. I said, and by the way, my mother's doing a recital at her retirement community in Cincinnati, and she's doing a recital of vocals and playing piano. And it was called The Bees. Betty plays Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, Bartok, Basie, and the Beatles. And I go, well, Mom, what Beatles songs are you going to do? Wondering, you know, Helter Skelter, I don't know what's she going to do. And she said, I'm going to do Yesterday because all the old people love that song, yeah. And she goes, I'm going to do When I'm 64 because my college group did it and she heard us do it and fell in love with the song. She said, but I'm going to change to When I'm 84 because everybody in the nursing home is more, or the retirement home is more than 64. You know, that's in their rearview mirror. You know, oh, I remember when I was 64. I was a youngster then, you know. But she did When I'm 84, and I had to buy her a kazoo and send it to her because we had a kazoo in our arrangement. She loved it, and she couldn't find a kazoo in Cincinnati. So I sent her a kazoo, and so she did it. So I'm telling Paul about this, and Paul starts laughing because he was like 62 then. He goes, oh, maybe I'll do that because I'm going to be 64 in a couple of years. Maybe I'll do When I'm 84. And I said, well, I anticipated you saying that, so I asked my mom, and she said, no need to call a lawyer. It's okay. Go ahead and do it. You know, she gives her permit. Thank you, Terry's mom. Thank you. And luckily, the tape is still rolling. I learned not to turn the tape recorder off with Paul because the good stuff comes after the interview's over, you know. And so the next day, and we were laughing. You could hear and Jeff Baker, his manager at the time, they're all just laughing. They love the story. So I played the tape on the air the next day, and a few weeks later I started hearing from listeners. They said, Paul was talking about your mom on Ellen DeGeneres. What? Yeah, he's telling the story about the old lady doing When I'm 84. And he's, you know, and then Paul's talking about your mom on Good Morning America. And Paul was talking about it on NPR, you know. And here he went around telling that story. And he got such a kick out of it. So when Betty, my mom, did the recital, we have a recording of it, when she's introducing it, she's like, oh, my daughter Terri told Paul, like Terri talks to Paul every day, you know. Oh, Terri told Paul about, you know. And so, you know, and everybody's laughing, and they probably think she's got dementia because her daughter talked to Paul McCartney. Right, Betty, whatever you say, you know. And but she got the biggest kick out of that here's Paul McCartney talking about her doing When I'm 84 all over the place. So, anyway, he's a good guy. Paul is a great guy. I told him once, I said, I feel like I chose my heroes well, and he gave me this beautiful smile, like, thank you, I get it. Because he's never embarrassed me. And he knows I got into radio because of the Beatles. Because the Beatles music changes your life. It gave me a direction, it gave me an idea. Like, what can I do with this excitement that I'm feeling? Oh, I could do that. And Jim Stagg, the disc jockey that was interviewing Ringo, I ended up meeting him. And in fact, I took him out to lunch once. He ended up in Chicago as a disc jockey while I was doing college radio. And I reached out to him, and he was very nice to me and gave me a tour of the station and stuff. And I didn't pursue it anymore because I learned this in Piqua. Don't be pushy and don't be like getting in people's face, you know, kind of pull back. And so I didn't bother him. But then he retired from radio, and then I was doing morning drive, and all of a sudden he knew who I was instead of me knowing who he was, and he owned a record store, and I called and I wanted to take him out to lunch, and he didn't know why Terri Hemmert wanted to take him out to lunch. And he thought everybody forgot about him. And I took him to lunch and I said, you were a big influence on me. And he goes, no, nobody. And I said, well, all the DJs back then were screaming and ringing cowbells and had slogans and stuff. And he was just straight ahead. He loved music, knew his stuff, respected the audience. I said, everybody on the FM radio now sounds like you sounded in 1968. You know, and he'd never thought of it that way because they don't have gimmicks anymore. They're just people and not screaming in the radio. So, anyway, he told me he had all these tapes in his Florida condo because he toured all 3 American tours with the Beatles and did interviews and sold it to a network of stations around the country. And that's why I saw a picture of him interviewing Ringo. He had those shipped up. He let me borrow those. They had not seen the light of day since the 60s. The tape was almost falling apart, and we transcribed it all. Unfortunately, it was before digital, because they should be on digital, but we did that, and I talked him into coming in. I used to do a marathon once a year, all Beatles from 6 a.m. to midnight, and I did the whole thing, you know, all by myself. And then I started bringing my former students in, and they would like have a slumber party all weekend producing bits, and I said, be creative, you know. And I didn't make money from it, and they didn't make money. I lost money feeding them, you know, ordering pizzas and stuff, and we had a great time. But I had him in that morning, and he said, he didn't want to be on the air, and he said, no, I'm shy about it. Nobody remembers me. And the outpouring of affection he got to me was me paying him back for being an inspiration. He was such a lovely man. But then he died years later, and I went to his wake, and I met his wife and his 3 adult daughters, and they were like so excited when I came in. They go, oh, Jim talked about you all the time. He called you his radio daughter, and he was so proud of you. And I had no idea because I held back because I didn't want to stalk him, you know. And I got to know them, and they came to my Christmas party that year because they were grieving. I said, bring your grandkids, come to my Christmas party, it's fun. And they came in with a present, and I have it hanging by my door. It's a big photograph I'd never seen before. I've never even seen an outtake of this. And I know my Beatle photographs, believe me, I'm a nerd. And it was framed, a beautiful photograph, the tour of 1966, their last tour. Jim's sitting there with his tape recorder and his mic, and all 4 Beatles are sitting around smiling. And I cried. It was beautiful. So it's hanging by my door. And I got to know them, and then I said, you should take those tapes and make a CD and sell it at Beatle Fest. And they did, and later his wife said to me, it wasn't so much selling those, but I'm really glad we did that because people were coming up and sharing their Jim Stagg stories. And every time I go by, I'd see them hugging people. It was just beautiful. So to me, it just the first time I met Paul, it was like one of the worst interviews I ever did because it was 2 minutes after a concert. He was smoking this funny-looking cigarette, and he was like, it wasn't really the greatest situation for an interview, and I was scared. It was my first Beatle encounter. 1975, and the guy from the record company had a stopwatch, and you got 2 minutes, boom. And I met Linda right before I met Paul, and I had 2 minutes with her, and I asked her a question, and I said, I'm scared to death. She goes, why? I said, because I'm going to meet Paul McCartney, and this is his wife, you know. And she goes, oh, I know how you feel, because the first time I met him, I was terrified, but he's really nice, you'll be fine, so thank you. So, and he was nice, but it was like the weirdest setting for an interview. So I'm sitting next to him with a microphone, ask him a couple questions, and he's not in a talkative mood. He'd say something funny, I giggle, and he'd elbow me, you know, and I go, oh, jeez. So every time my morning guy at the station wants to make fun of me, he'll play that. And then I remind him he called Bono Bono. So that shuts him up. But anyway, Paul was very sweet, and at the end of the thing, this is why I learned to keep the tape recorder on, because I turned off the tape recorder at the end of my 2 minutes, and I said, I just have to tell you thank you, because you changed my life, and I can't go into detail because the next person was waiting for their 2 minutes. I said, but the first thing that popped in my mind is my first night of college. We were all homesick and scared to death, and we didn't know each other. And I got my guitar out, and we ended up, a whole bunch of us, singing Beatles songs till 2 in the morning. And I said, the next morning we saw each other, and we were like friends already. I said, that happened in my life a million times around your music, and I want to thank you. And he said, well, that's what it was about, bringing people together like that. And I thought, he gets it. He gets it. That's what it is about, bringing people. That's what your band's about, bringing people together like this. And maybe somebody will screw up at state, and you'll have a good story to tell the rest of your life. Hopefully it won't be you. Is that my cue to shut up?
I don't want to hold these students too long.
Can I tell one more story? It just came to me that I had.
An hour? Okay.
Thank you. Okay, one more story, because this is a story that will inform you how you can make a difference, even when you don't set out to make a difference. How many of you are U2 fans? Few? U2? U2? Okay. U2 was a struggling band from Ireland. They weren't really big and famous yet. We were playing them because XRT plays a lot of new music, and I love that. And not just the stuff that's a big hit. So we were playing U2. I was asked by there's a Peace Museum in Chicago for several years, and I was asked to help curate an exhibit called Give Peace a Chance. And it was about folk and rock music and how it influenced the peace movement. And most of it was going to be John and Yoko stuff. And they wanted me to help curate that because Yoko promised to cooperate. And that's how Yoko and I got to know each other. I'd met her a couple times, but we worked together a lot on this, and she's actually very lovely. She's a wonderful person and really a wicked sense of humor. She's great. And so I was working on that. We had a whole year to do it because it was going to be this huge exhibit. And the more I worked on it, the more I thought, this is all the 60s, and this was in the 80s. And I thought, there's stuff going on now. We should show them that music still influences the peace movement. And so I talked them into expanding it a bit. And so I called on people I knew, like the Talking Heads and Laurie Anderson, Clash and stuff like that, and got stuff from them to put in the exhibit. So they'll see it's right now. And then I thought, well, it's too white, you know. So Willie Dixon, this great blues musician that wrote songs that Led Zeppelin and everybody else covered, he did a peace song once, and I got a 45 framed of Willie Dixon doing this peace song. And then I thought Stevie Wonder, was the main motivation behind a Dr. King holiday, and he did a big concert in Washington, D.C. to draw attention to it and raise money, so I got one of those posters. And then Bob Marley, who I'd worked with a few times, he was wonderful. Bob Marley interviewed the guy that wrote the definitive biography, and Bob Marley did a peace concert in Jamaica where he got the two political opposition leaders to shake hands. They don't shake hands in Jamaica, they shoot each other. They really, shaking, like here politicians will shake hands and act like they like each other and then trash each other. But this was a big deal for them to shake hands, and there's a picture in this guy's book of, you know, so I said, could you send me a photographer's print, you know, so he did. So I was really trying to expand this exhibit so it wasn't all Bob Dylan and the Beatles and all that. And so just before the exhibit opened, U2 put out an album called War. And I thought, I'm not a good predictor about what's going to be popular, but this is going to be big. And sure enough, MTV was around then, and they went nuts on this. So by the time this came out, they were huge. And I said to the museum, I said, they just put out a big anti-war album. We need to hook them up with the museum. So all I wanted was a flag that I saw in a record store. It said U2, War, white flag, and a manuscript in Bono's handwriting of one of the lyrics of one of the anti-war songs. So I didn't care if I met the band or not, you know, but I started calling the record company and people, and all I want is a flag as big as you can and one of the songs, and I kept getting blown off. And the moral of the story is, don't let rejection stop you. Be persistent, keep doing it, don't give up. And finally, I got the number for their road manager, Ellen Darst. And I called her, and by then I was in despair. Please, can I just have a flag? And she goes, well, let me talk to the boys, and I'll get back to you. And I knew they were coming to town, but I didn't ask to meet them or anything. She said, actually, the boys are real interested. They want to meet with you. So I got the director of the Peace Museum to bring a couple catalogs of exhibits, and we met them at a coffee house at their hotel. And I actually saw them walking around before our meeting, and they looked really tired. They were doing a bus tour. They weren't even staying overnight. They'd come from Detroit. They got a room so they could take a nap, do a sound check, come back, take a shower, and go do the show, then get in a bus and go to Minneapolis that night. That's glamorous. They were exhausted, and I thought, this isn't going to go well. These guys are going to be just, they're probably on drugs, who knows, And we meet at the coffee shop, and as soon as we start talking about this, they woke up. They were so excited. They went, there's a museum for peace? Oh my God. And I said, all we want is manuscript and a flag. Then, and they wanted to do more, so we and we gave them 2 catalogs, one of the current exhibit and one of a previous exhibit. The previous exhibit was Dr. Martin Luther King, Peacemaker. Well, the next album had 2 songs about Dr. King, who they didn't know much about before that because they were Irish and they didn't know that much American history. But they ended up doing a big festival in Dublin about Dr. King and had some of the exhibit there to do. And then the current exhibit, they were so interested in, they actually went to the exhibit to see it. And in fact, VH1 used to do these documentaries about rock bands, and they had this as a big moment in their career when they went to the Peace Museum to see this exhibit. And it shows 4 actors kind of foggy walking into a museum, but it was a big deal. But the name of the exhibit, it was about the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II, and it was called The Unforgettable Fire. Their next album was called The Unforgettable Fire. So just this one little meeting in the coffee shop, they said totally turned them around. And there are books out there, my students will do a paper on you too, and all of a sudden they'll say, you were in that book. They talked about you in that book. I said, yeah, but to me it's an example of not because I didn't even dream of that. All I wanted was the flag, and which we got. In fact, they gave us a stage flag. It was gigantic, and it was the last thing you'd see as you'd leave, knowing that, and there was a current album at the time, War was, knowing that the artists talk about peace and justice and all kinds of stuff in every decade. And they wrote about it, and they said, well, Rick and Julie came out to see them once, and we were supposed to go backstage and see them, and they were all excited, and then they came out and said, Bono has a sore throat, he can't meet with all you guys, but there are 3 people he wants to see, and I was one of them, so I got to go in and see them, and they were so nice. They were like old Piqua friends or something, and on their concert tour book, they had a timeline of their career, and there was meeting with representatives of Peace Museum, Chicago, USA. And they always pointed back as that was the moment they decided to use their influence to do good. And that's why Bono's he does so much stuff about HIV and AIDS, about poverty, about helping farmers in, Africa that during a drought, he's there with the UN doing that stuff, and they always point back to being able to be involved with the Peace Museum. And right up to when the Peace Museum closed every year, they would send stuff for their fundraising auction. They would autograph electric guitars and send them. And they were so appreciative that we kind of put them on this different path. So the moral of my story is don't give up when people turn you down. Keep going, keep going, keep going. If you really believe this is something of value, not just to yourself, but to a good cause, because I wasn't going to give up. I wanted that lyric sheet. And then they asked me to MC the city observance of the 50th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima at Chicago in the big Daly Plaza, which is the city center. And it was a big deal. They had all these people, and I got to MC it. And one of the things I did was read one of Bono's poems, and it was about the Peace Museum and how there was a museum for peace and how influential it was to them. So I got to read that in public. It made me feel good because I was on the phone a lot trying to get people to help me out. But anyway, that's an illustration of if you have an idea for something like that, follow through. You will get rejection. Nobody told me, this is the reason I want to tell you this. Nobody warned me about this stuff. Nobody warned me about this guy who's going to tell me I'm never going to make it. That was a revelation to me and a shock. But go into it knowing that stuff is going to happen. That's part of the journey, and just plow through. And if you don't reach what you want right now, you're going to find something you never would have imagined on the way. And this may be even a better fit. But get busy is what I'm saying. Get busy and follow your dreams. Don't let the BS get you down. After you graduate from Ohio, you can use the full term if you'd like in your brain, but hang in there. Yeah. Woo! Yourself, Mr. Guitar Man. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me back to Piqua.
Well, I hate to do it, but I really have to
Pizza.
let these students go.
Yeah,
get some
pizza.
But thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Chris.
Terry.
Thanks for
so
inviting me, and
much.
thanks for organizing all
Glad
this.
to have you here.
It's
and,
an honor. This is my vacation. This is how I spend my vacation. I love you guys.
my takeaway was the follow your dream, and my quick story was 85, I bought my first computer when Macintosh first came out. Coolest thing I ever saw, and I figured if I don't do this now, I'm going to miss the whole computer thing. And I don't know, 20 years later, I had a name badge that said Chris Good is here to see Steve Jobs, because Apple was my client. And Steve blew us off, and my boss got mad, and that's the other story. But man, I wanted that computer, and I've sold software my whole career, and so yeah, that was the thing that sparked me, and they were new and interesting, and then wham, off you go. So
Do you know you set up my first computer? Remember that?
I do remember
In my
that.
basement?
Yeah.
The little boxy Apple?
I'm sorry, I can't. It's DOS, right? I can't help you anymore. No, I'm sorry.
You tried to get me on AOL too, and it didn't.
Yeah. But
You have mail,
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris.
Students, we have tickets for you. If you're interested in Fawn Kaiser's show, we'd like to hand out tickets for you before you take off. And the show really is August 2nd, and it's rolling it back, paying it forward. I'd say it's a Fawn Kaiser show because Fawn's my buddy, but really it's about local musicians as well. Your classmate, Christian Sterrett, his dad, Lonnie. And they have some other special guests, local artists that are going to perform on August 2nd as part of their show. And again, all the funds that we raise are going to stay here with the music program. So that's our purpose. We're coming for our class reunion, but we got to do some fun stuff, raise a little heck, and leave a little something behind that benefits this town we love.
And Fawn did that song a few years ago and mentioned your deceased classmates, including my sister Joni.
Yeah, yeah. So
you.
my colleague Fawn here, my classmate Fawn Kaiser.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, he wrote a song
That meant a
called
lot to the
circa
family.
1979, and 10 years ago now. And it's kind of become the theme song of our class, and it talks about hanging out in Piqua and what comes after high school. So we have tickets for the students that would like to attend that show on August 2nd. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you. Good luck to you. Decker.
Where's it at? Like, where's it?
The Octagon Barn, and it's on the ticket. Octagon Barn.
Thanks, you guys. Good luck.
Yay, thank you,
Good luck.
Terry.
Make Piqua proud.